Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Mayor Mamdani has been laser focused on housing policy and tenant protection during this first week in office. He has already signed an executive order that directs city agencies to hold rental ripoff hearings. He's also spent time touring rundown apartments in Brooklyn. Here to talk about the new mayor's housing agenda and much more is the newly appointed director of the mayor's office to protect tenants. Cea Weaver is here. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
We've talked before because you're an activist and you've been mostly active on the state level. How does it feel after all of those years of activism, of going to hearings and pushing for legislation, to now be at the center working out of City Hall?
Well, I'm extraordinarily proud to be joining the Mamdani administration. And, as an assembly member, Mamdani shared a lot of our fights for stronger tenant protections and more affordable housing. And so eager to continue to serve in this role alongside him and to fight for the affordability agenda. So far, so good.
What's going to happen in the rental ripoff hearings?
There are many tenants across the city of New York who are paying their rent, but in addition to the rent, additional fees are being added on. One in particular I've heard a lot about is something like a credit card processing fee, where people are, out of convenience sake, transitioning to paying their rent online, but then the portal is adding a 2% fee, a 3% fee in addition to the rent, and to have to pay that every month. So we're taking a hard look at the different sort of fees, whether it's to pay your rent online, whether it's to have access to washing machines, air conditioners, and so on, that are driving up the cost of rent and allowing property owners to get around our rent stabilization laws or other protections against rent increases that the city has.
Well, as you can imagine, there are landlords, including small landlords, mom and pops, who feel as if, because of your background, because of what the mayor said on the campaign trail, that this administration is not going to be neutral in fights between tenants and landlords, that it'll always take the side of tenants, even to the detriment of landlords who are suffering under a real set of problems of their own.
I think it's really important that we consider that our housing stock has to be high quality. It has to be a safe and affordable and a stable place to live. And sometimes that might mean controlling the costs for renters, and it might mean controlling the cost for owners too. I think we're really interested in looking at some of the things that are driving up the costs of operating housing, like insurance costs, like property taxes, and what are the things that we can do to actually both ensure the housing is high quality, that it is able to make capital investments in the property, and that tenants can afford to live. I think we can do that without compromising on the affordability agenda.
I mean, one example actually would be the credit card processing fees, right? I mean, that's MasterCard and Visa. That's what they charge for you to run through their systems. The former mayor, Eric Adams, said that you were, quote, out of your effing mind. That was in response to a resurfaced tweet from way back when, something you'd said on Twitter about home ownership being a tool of white supremacy. I wanted to give you a chance to respond. You're not out of your mind, right?
I don't think I'm out of my mind. Okay. I think that some of those things are certainly not how I would say things today, and are regretful. But I do think my sort of decades of experience fighting for more affordable housing sort of stands on its own. I'm proud to be in this role fighting for stronger tenants' rights, and I think that for many years people have been locked out of the property market. That has produced a lot of systemic and racial inequalities in our system, and I want to make sure that everybody has a safe and affordable place to live, whether they rent or own, and that is something that I'm laser focused on in this new role.
You and I live in the same neighborhood. You're a renter, I'm a brownstoner. There are a lot, we don't rent out anything, but but homeowners are dealing with a lot of different problems. Is any part of your portfolio going to look at the expenses that just plain old non-landlord homeowners have to go through?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of common ground between renters and owners in the housing platform that we hope to dig in on in the next few weeks. I think something that the mayor has talked about a lot is property tax reform, which I think is certainly driving up the costs for renters and for some owners in the city as well.
A lot of the tweets that are also drawing old tweets that are drawing some comment. Are you, in one you say you're supportive of a, quote, no more white men in office platform. And then in another you say, impoverish the white middle class. My white colleagues are not terribly offended, but they are curious as to where that's coming from and what that says about this administration.
Those are certainly regretful tweets and not something that I would say today. honestly, I think that what is important is that we have an administration that is focused on equity and affordability for all New Yorkers.
Okay, well, these were brought to the attention of the mayor, and he did have a response. Let's take a look at that.
We made the decision to have Cea Weaver serve as our executive director for the Mayor's Office to Protect Tenants, to build on the work that she has done to protect tenants across the city. And we're already seeing the results of that work. So thank you, guys.
Okay, so the mayor's with you. Let's talk about Pinnacle. This is something that just developed in the last few days. Pinnacle is a large real estate group. They recently declared bankruptcy. Among other things, what they did was load up on a lot of debt. They bought, with eyes wide open, I believe, a bunch of rent-stabilized apartments, over 5,000 of them. They couldn't make the numbers work. They ended up declaring bankruptcy. That leaves the tenants in a very precarious place. What's the administration's approach to that going to be?
So yesterday evening, we intervened in the bankruptcy proceeding, asking the judge for a 30-day adjournment in order for the city to take a hard look at the conditions that are in the building, as well as a plan that has been put forth by the top bidder, because we want to ensure that whoever is taking on this portfolio is able to comply with both rent stabilization laws as well as the housing maintenance code. Pinnacle has a long track record of sort of harassing tenants out of their homes and disinvesting in their buildings. Going back to 2011, there was a judgment against them for unlawfully pressuring tenants to leave their homes. And so we know that these buildings are in bad condition. The mayor saw it firsthand on Inauguration Day. And we want to make sure that whatever happens to this portfolio, housing quality is front and center.
Not speaking about the entire portfolio, but I'm sure you're aware that there are buildings that are out there. They're called zombie buildings, where the rent roll, in part because of rent stabilization, is never, ever going to reach the level of financial strength to provide the needed repairs and run the place in a state of good repair.
I think that I think it's important that we make sure that rent stabilization is protected for the merits that it has, which is keeping people in their homes, providing safe and predictable rent increases for tenants, and ensuring that people have stability over generations. Rent stabilization is in many ways the largest affordable housing program that our city has, and it's important that we protect it. We need to take a hard look at where there may be distress that needs to be addressed, but it's important that we not legislate around these outliers. I don't think anyone really knows right now just how many apartments are vacant. The numbers vary wildly, and so we're very eager to sort of really dig into that question in the coming weeks and to try to develop an appropriate policy solution that is right-sized to the scope of the problem.
Well, you've seen some of the reports, though. I mean, the Apartment Association has put them out where, again, not looking at the entire program, but like sort of, pulling out a building and saying, like, look, here's 150 units, this is the rent roll, these are the financial constraints that it operates under. This is a building that will never work under rent stabilization. What's that fundamental question? How's that going to be handled by your administration?
I think rent stabilization is important for the stability that it provides, and the reality is that tenants' incomes are not going up. So we need to start with the fact that changing the rent stabilization laws doesn't solve a problem if tenants can't pay their rent increase. So then what do? I think we need to take a hard look at what are some of the other operating costs, and do we have levers there to sort of reduce the prices that people are forced to pay to sort of operate buildings that maybe the city could solve with some policy change.
Is it possible that the city will end up taking over some of these buildings?
I think it's not really way too soon to say.
Okay. We will keep an eye on all of this stuff. Thanks so much for coming by. Great talking with you.
Thank you so much.